very happy to have the privilege of introducing Padmavajra, who is no stranger to this Sangha. He has been here before and physically in our centre and gave a talk quite some time ago in the before coronavirus period. And I had the pleasure of entertaining him at home and watching him do a running race in the road with my children, which was very delightful. So he's talking to us tonight from the shrine room at Padmaloka. So I should say, so Padmavajra has been, I think this year he will have been ordained for 45 years, is that correct? Something like that? So, ish, yes. But anyway, he's been around, he's been in the order for a very long time. And for much of that time, he has lived at Padmaloka. I think he's lived at Padmaloka for getting on for 30 years. And in that time, he's helped many hundreds, if not thousands, of men who've passed through Padmaloka to deepen their going for refuge to the three jewels, and seen them into the order. And I've been one of those lucky recipients. So Padmavajra has been there to witness my transition into the order and that of others, of many, many others. And so he's dedicated much of his order life to that, to bringing men to the Dharma, to deepening their going for refuge. And equally significant, if possibly if not more so significant, is this context in which Padmavajra is sitting, which is the shrine room at Padmaloka, which, as you can see, is full of imagery. It's full of a kind of a rich panoply of Buddhist art, picturing the great Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And I like to think, so Padmaloka is a place where the transcendental and the temporal mix. So it's a retreat centre, it's a busy place, there's comings and goings, there's stuff to organise, there's admin, there's study and so forth, and there's a certain degree of mixing with the world. But when you get to the shrine room of Padmaloka, it's the transcendental that takes over from the temporal. It's not used for anything else. And when you get into that shrine room, you know that you are in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. You are being welcomed in to the bosom of the transcendental, if you like. So the shrine room is almost like a portal to a completely different dimension of being, to a higher dimension of being. And it's also a place that has witnessed spiritual rebirths, in the sense of people joining the Triratna Buddhist order in those hallowed precincts. So it's very, very appropriate that Padmavajra should be talking to us tonight on the theme of spiritual rebirth from such a beautiful and auspicious place. So with that introduction, I shall hand over to Padmavajra to talk about spiritual rebirth. So over to you, Padmavajra.
Thank you very much, Akasharaja, for such a beautiful introduction. One of the loveliest introductions I've ever heard, especially talking so beautifully about Padmaloka. We really appreciate hearing things like that here. We do things now over Zoom all over the world these days. One's never quite sure how it's landing, but having that introduction, gives me a lot of confidence to communicate to you this evening. And I'm really glad. I've been really looking forward to joining the Shrewsbury Sangha. I'm never quite sure how to say it, what the right term is. It was explained to me, but anyway, I'm with you. And I do remember that evening when I came, and that time that I spent in Shrewsbury with Akasharaja and Padmavajra and the children, and that was really great fun. And I really enjoyed that evening at the centre. Beautiful centre. I mean, such a lovely centre. And I hope very much that you'll all be back there soon. Such a beautifully designed and made centre with such a lovely atmosphere, such a warm atmosphere. So it was a great pleasure for me to be there with you. And yes, I'm very glad to be with you here this evening in this form, speaking out of Padmaloka about spiritual rebirth. And yes, I think I do have an advantage looking around this room at all these images of spiritual rebirths of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And in thinking about this talk, I immediately thought of the first time I heard this phrase, these words, spiritual rebirth. It's interesting. I've been doing various talks. It seems to be a bit of a thing at centres at the moment. The system of meditation or the system of practice. Because I gave talks on positive emotion the other week. But whenever I hear any of these parts of the system of meditation, I'm immediately reminded of when I first heard them referred to. That was in 1978, quite a long time ago. I'd been ordained for a couple of years. I was ordained in 1976, and you have to understand, well, it wasn't Tri Ratna then, it was the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and it was a very, very different community to how it is now. And then we were in a very different world then. I mean, basically there was Bhante, there was Sangharakshita with his vision and his teaching. Incredible vision, incredible teaching, his befriending, his communication, and a group, if you like, of men and women, mostly younger men and women, young with a lot of energy and very pioneering. I mean, we hadn't even finished building the London Buddhist Centre at that time. That tells you how long ago it was. It was still turning from an old fire station, an old Victorian fire station, being reborn into our largest urban Buddhist centre. We hadn't started in India in 1976. So it was such a different world. But with this tremendous energy and vitality, of course, Bhante Sangharakshita was a lot younger at that time. He didn't have a plan. He always said he never had a kind of systematic plan to set things up. There was no kind of 10-year plan. He had vision, he had inspiration, he had his own experience, his own insights into the Dharma, and responding very much to the world in which he was in and the people with whom he was communicating. So a very, very different world. I think this is sometimes lost sight of. People tend to think that we've always been like this. We always were, like this. Well, we really weren't. It was a very different time. And, I'd learnt meditation. I'd learnt the mindfulness of breathing and the Padmavajra. I'd been on retreats and done just sitting meditation alongside mindfulness and metta. At ordination, I was given a visualization practice and mantra recitation. And there was this practice called the contemplation of the 6 elements. These different practices sort of around that people were doing. And, you knew it was a good idea before you meditated on a Buddha or Bodhisattva, to do the Padmavajra or something like that. But in a sense, it wasn't systematic. There were these great practices and there was this vision. And you kind of got on with it. You kind of got on with it with one another. I mean, it's incredible how much we've got going on now, systems and trainings and retreats on this, that, and the other. It really wasn't like that in those days, but although something really was happening, very fresh, very open, very alive. But in 1978, Bhante did this order convention. In the very early days, he had every couple of years, he'd get the whole order together. And on this convention, it was a very special order convention. For me, it's the archetypal order convention. Sangharakshita gave 3 very, very significant lectures. One on going for refuge, where he talked about, for the first time, about levels of going for refuge. An amazing talk called A Vision of History, where he talks about history as a sort of battle between the group and the spiritual community. And another talk called A System of Meditation. As well as that, he led all the meditations, led all the pujas, saw lots of people. Incredible sort of energy. It was just Dharma, Dharma, Dharma. I was leading prostrations as well every afternoon, 108 prostrations, really fast. That's the way we did them. So it was quite an atmosphere. But in this lecture system of meditation, it was enormously helpful because he showed the relationship between the different meditation practices. So mindfulness of breathing, that was for integration, gathering yourself together. He said in that lecture, you stumble along. I mean, I'm sure people don't do this these days, but in those days, yes, it was true. People did stumble along to the Buddhist center, a sort of, all scattered, sort of just about held together with a name and address. And then through mindfulness and the mindfulness of breathing, they gathered themselves together, made something more coherent. You need to be coherent if you're going to move forward in Dharma life. But then he talked about positive emotion. He really got going when he talked about positive emotion. I mean, he was speaking very strongly. No spiritual life without positive emotion. No spiritual life without metta, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, without faith and devotion, and very strong emotions, hot, positive emotions for one another. He talked about positive emotion being the lifeblood of the order of our Sangha, the lifeblood. Very, very strong language. Then he talked about spiritual death. He said that in these first two stages of practice, you create a positive, radiant, distinctive individual. But wonderful though that is, it has to die away so that, if you like, the transcendental individual can arise. And he evoked the stage of spirit. He went into the stage of spiritual death in quite some detail. I won't reprise that. But when he talked about positive emotion, he just evoked what you do in a visualization practice. We do in the order, a vast blue sky, a seed syllable out of which arises a lotus on which is a bodhisattva or a Buddha, incredibly beautiful, radiant. And then he said, this is you. This is you. This is what you really are. You in eternity, if you can just die spiritually. Very, very powerful. And of course, as he spoke, he was embodying it. He was really communicating it. So I never forgot these things. I was only, 21 at that order convention. So you can imagine it made a very deep impression upon me, the whole, and enormously helpful, how all of our practices relate to one another. So as soon as I hear that word, spiritual rebirth, this is what I'm thinking about. And of course, this whole way of talking, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, what he's trying to get at is that, look, if you take up a Buddhist life, it means there is going to be very, very deep and profound change, very deep and profound transformation. When you practice the Dharma, when you practice Buddhism, you're not just sort of adding on to your ordinary life. This is really quite important to understand that, you can take up meditation, you can take up Buddhist practice, you can feel it's making your life better. Well, that's good. No doubt, that's a really important and good thing. But the aim in the end of Buddhist practice, of all Buddhist practice, is the total transformation of the individual, of the person. And transformation involves death and rebirth. I mean, I don't know what it's like down your way, but here in Norfolk, I mean, we've had the most gorgeous spring open up. The magnolia outside of my bedroom, which Vajrapriya and Akasharaja will know very well, is in full glorious bloom. I mean, only a few days ago, they were tight buds, and unfortunately, they're being completely hammered now by these cold winds and snow. But there's a transformation. And in any transformation, there's a death. There has to be. The buds give way to the flower. And of course, the flowers give way to the leaves and so on. So it's the same with Dharma life. There will be a dying away of things, and there will be a wonderful emergence and a rebirth. And this way of thinking about the Dharma life, this way of talking about spiritual life, has great antiquity. has great antiquity. It goes back to the Buddha himself. There are a number of places where the Buddha talks in this way. Unfortunately, I haven't. They're usually addressed to monks. I haven't found any of these addressed to nuns. So I apologise. Well, I can't really apologise for the Buddha, but just listen to this. I am an enlightened one, always responsive to requests, open-handed, bearing my last body, an unsurpassed doctor and surgeon. You are my own sons, born from my mouth, born of the Dhamma, created by the Dhamma, heirs of the Dhamma, not heirs of material things. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And I'm sure if he was talking to a group of nuns, he would have talked about daughters of the Buddha. He would have said, you are my own daughters, born from my mouth, born of the Dhamma, created by the Dhamma, heirs of the Dhamma, not heirs of material things. So very, very strong language, this idea, born of my mouth. In other words, born of my communication. And of course, one of the things that the Buddha is addressing here is caste. The Indian caste system, that people are born into. And of course, lineage is huge. Lineage and family are hugely important in India, even today, hugely important. But he's saying, no, when you have become my disciple, you are born now of my communication. So you are my offspring, you are my sons, my daughters, and you are heirs of the Dhamma now, not heirs of material things, not heirs of worldly things. Very, very powerful way of speaking. So that's definitely indicating a spiritual rebirth. And in another more famous passage from the Udana, the Buddha talks about how the rivers, he gives this wonderful discourse on the Dhamma Vinaya being like the great and mighty ocean. And he says, in the same way that the different rivers, the Ganges, the Sarasvati, the Yamuna, and so on, the way these rivers flow into the ocean, they lose their names, Ganges, Yamuna, and so on, and they are just known as the great and mighty ocean. So in the same way, when people come from the different castes, when they come from the Brahmin caste, the Kshatriya caste, that's the warrior caste, the merchant caste, and the outcast, the Shudra community, they lose their caste names, and they are now known just as sons, and I'm sure he would also say, or daughters of the Sakyan, of the Buddha. They've been reborn. They are no longer part of a caste. That's all gone. That conditioning has gone. And they are just now those, in our terms, going for refuge to the Buddha. They have been reborn. So this is very, very strong language, and it really touches something. Perhaps we don't feel the full force of it in our own society, but in that society, it would be regarded as a huge change, not just a spiritual change, but having great social implications, you could even say political implications. And, Dr. Ambedkar, the great leader of Dalit people who converted to Buddhism and, took so many hundreds of thousands of followers of his into the Dhamma and really has revived Buddhism in modern India. At the time of the great mass conversion in Nagpur, and we're coming up to Dr. Ambedkar's birth date, Ambedkar Jayanti, on the 14th of April, he gave, alongside, after giving the refuges and precepts, he gave 22 solemn oaths to keep the conversion movement pure. And at the end, it says, I firmly believe the Dhamma of the Buddha is the only true religion. I believe that by adopting Buddhism, I am having a rebirth. I believe by adopting Buddhism, I am having a rebirth. Very powerful for that community. A rebirth out of slavery, a rebirth out of untouchability, a rebirth out of being regarded as impure, a complete transformation, becoming a follower of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So even in modern times, we have this notion of a spiritual rebirth with enormous implications, practical implications for one's life. So it's a very, very powerful way of speaking. Interesting, in the case of the stories, like the first thing I mentioned of people being reborn from the Buddha's mouth. When we talk about spiritual rebirth in our own movement, we don't often talk about where you are born from, because you have to be born from something or other. We talk about spiritual death, and spiritual rebirth is just sort of apparently this emergence out of the void, but I don't think it's quite like that. I think rebirth comes about because you have teachers, you have a Sangha, you have a spiritual ideal which you're profoundly connected to. So let's try and open up the whole business of spiritual rebirth. And I'm going to take another text, a very famous text by Shantideva, the Bodhicharyavatara. And here he uses this imagery of birth, of being reborn. He's talking about here what's called the bodhicitta, the arising of the will to enlightenment for the liberation of all life, the emergence of wisdom and compassion. And it's clear from the text that Shantideva has sort of undergone this. And he has these very, very stirring and moving words as the Sugatas, that's the Buddhas, of ancient times embraced this bodhicitta in the same way as they progressed in the bodhisattva training. So shall I generate the bodhicitta for the welfare of the world, and I too shall train in those precepts in regular order. The wise one, who seizes that bodhicitta with serene faith, should continue to encourage his resolve so that the bodhicitta will grow and thrive. Today, my birth has borne fruit, and my human life is well obtained. Today, I am born into the Buddha family, and I am now a son of the Buddha, and now I must live up to my birth, and by my actions must place no stain upon that spotless family. Just as a blind man may find by chance a priceless jewel in a heap of refuse, so somehow this bodhicitta has arisen even in me. And of course, Shantideva was obviously a man, so he's talking about being a son of the Buddha, and I think it's perfectly permissible if you're reciting this in other contexts. You can change it from son to daughter. Today I am reborn as a daughter of the Buddha, or some translation have a child of the Buddha, which I don't think doesn't quite have the force, if you like, or the offspring of the Buddha. But you know what I mean, this idea, this notion that with the arising of the force of wisdom and compassion, the bodhicitta, you are reborn. You're in a different family now. You've got a different lineage now. You're a descendant of a different ancestry. It's the Buddha lineage, the Buddha kula. You're part of that now. So you have different responsibilities. You have different duties. Now I must live up to my birth, and by my actions must place no stain upon that spotless family. You have a certain pride in the positive sense in this family tradition. So I want to just try and open this up a little bit, see what we can glean from these verses of Shantideva about what might bring about spiritual rebirth. There's so much to say here, but what, in a sense, we need to be paying attention to. So the first thing I want to go to is this verse 25. Today my birth has borne fruit, and my human life is well obtained. Today my birth has borne fruit, and my human life is well obtained. So I want to start in talking about spiritual life, about spiritual rebirth, by talking about the well-obtained human life. in a way, you have to be perhaps a little bit careful with the language of spiritual rebirth, and perhaps even with spiritual death, that you don't try to, it's not about, as it were, not cherishing and valuing what you already have. In a way, what you already are, who you already are. There's this, fashionable term that we've heard in recent years. You've got to be careful of spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing, that you're so eager, to attain the ideal that you ignore what's in front of you. Perhaps even ignore sort of difficult material that's in the way because, well, you want to get away from it. But the first thing, if you're serious about spiritual rebirth, is to really value your precious human existence. Early on in the Bodhicharya Avatara, Shantideva says, this favourable moment, so hard to obtain, has arrived, leading to the fulfillment of man's liberation, something like that. This favourable moment, so hard to obtain, has arrived. The moment, kshana, is the word in Sanskrit, and that refers to this human life. This human life is a moment, it's a lightning flash in the darkness of a clouded night. We tend not to think of it like that. We tend to think we've got all the time in the world. But no, we actually don't have very long. And it's very, very precious, this human life. And we need to value our human life. Sometimes people have real difficulty with, developing metta for themselves, valuing themselves, and, they have perhaps have had difficult early life or all sorts of complications for one reason or another. But look, don't dwell on that. The thing is, you're a human being. That already is a major achievement as far as the Buddha and the tradition are concerned. Human life is an attainment. The tradition says that if you're a human being, you must have planted very, very deep roots of merit in your past to get to this place of being a human being. We tend to, I think, undervalue our human life, or if we do value it, it's overvalued in the wrong way, if you like. And there can be a lot of bad press that human beings give to being to other human beings or to the human race. What we're doing to the planet, all this, and how terrible we can be to each other, and all the rest of it. But actually, a human being is a remarkable thing. A remarkable being is this being human. Because as human beings, we have a remarkable kind of consciousness already. I'm not talking about any sort of spiritual things right now, but we have a consciousness that is able to reflect on experience. This is a remarkable thing, what we call self or reflexive consciousness, terribly undervalued. We don't just have sense experience, and we don't just react to stimuli. We don't just lash out if we're attacked or something like that, or we don't just go on eating greedily and things like that. Well, some of us don't. I mean, I'm not one of those. But anyway, but we've got this possibility of reflecting on our experience. Reflecting on our experience can get us into difficulty too, because if it's in the grip of negative emotions, that reflection can be rather unpleasant. We can compare ourselves unfavorably with others, or favorably in the wrong way. So what we can end up is envying others or being contemptuous of others. But if we recognize the value of reflexive consciousness, we can actually start, the great thing here, we can imagine what we can be. We don't have to just be this now. If we're in a bad state, we know that we can be different, especially if we've done some Buddhist practice. We can look back and say, well, no, I have changed. So I can go forward to this. I'm not just doomed to this present state. So reflexive consciousness is a bit like the imagination in the best sense. We can leap forward very, very positively and imagine ourselves being, well, why not a little bit Buddha-like, or at least on the way to that. And this is a wonderful thing, a wonderful, precious thing. Human life also enables us, human consciousness, reflexive consciousness, also enables us to imaginatively identify with others. We know what it means to feel pleasure and to feel pain. We know that we really want to be looked after, to be protected. We know that we want to live and live well. We know that we have fears about illness and death and loss and all the rest of it. Other people are exactly the same. You don't need to know any information about anybody else, or even for that matter, any living being whatsoever, to know that they don't want to feel pain. They want to be well. They want to be happy. They want to be safe. They want to be treated well. That's all you need to know. And you have that information. So your consciousness, because of this reflexive consciousness, you can reach out, as it were, imaginatively to embrace others. This is a wonderful quality of being a human being. And then ethics comes and loving kindness comes. And we need to dwell on this so much more than we do. We have this very, very precious human existence. And honestly, if we could just dwell on that, well, we'd probably start swooning in bliss after a while. Spiritual life, well, we'd probably start getting spiritually reborn if we just dwelt on that and the potential in that. But we can go further than that, much further than that. And the Buddhist tradition, the meditations on this state go much further when you're really reflecting on the well-obtained humanity that Shantideva talks about. You can reflect, well, actually, what has made me has been other people. I'm not an isolated unit. Other people have really contributed to make me who and what I am. They've enabled so much to happen in me. We often dwell on the bad things that we've inherited from others, but there are so many good things that have come from others to us. Beginning with our parents. I've talked about being reborn as a son or daughter of the Buddhas, but first of all, we've also got to just start honouring who we've been born from in the first place. Our parents. Now, I know very well that not everybody has had straightforward relationships with their parents. I mean, does anybody have a straightforward relationship with their parents? And I know from my experience of listening to life stories here, I mean, some people have really suffered a lot in their early life. But I remember early on in my Dharma life, before I was ordained, I remember on a seminar, Bhante was saying, Sangharakshita saying, it's very, very important to develop a positive relationship with your parents, or developing a positive attitude towards them. Might not be easy to establish a positive relationship, but you need to start developing love and appreciation towards them. He said, you can't really have a neutral attitude to them. You have to acknowledge how they've affected you, and you need to turn it around. If it's negative, if it's positive, build on it. Fortunately, I had very loving parents, and I remember him when he talked about this, I was really relieved, even though I left home at 17 to get into the Dharma, not to run away from them. I just wanted to go on the adventure of the Dharma, but I was really pleased because I come from a family that is very, very family, if you see what I mean. And I was really glad when he said, well, love your parents. Yes, go forth from them for sure. Make your own life, but keep them in mind with loving kindness and treat them as human beings. And he was making the point that we are our parents. They condition us so strongly, so powerfully, that we have to come to terms with that. And you can only come to terms with it by, yes, becoming your own person, in a sense, going forth from them, but also loving them, appreciating them, valuing them. And I've seen some remarkable things in our own Sangha, people with very, very difficult early lives, turning that around, changing, if you like, the story, changing the narrative, interrupting the karma, if you like, that has the negative karma that came out of their past. So part of developing, moving in the direction of spiritual rebirth is actually that valuing, really learning to value and changing our relationship with our parents. I think this is tremendously important. In some, well, all Buddhist practices, they recommend, this is the Tibetan tradition especially, that every meditation you do, every puja, you're doing it with mum and dad on your shoulders and all sentient beings all around you. They're with you. It's like acknowledging, they're in me. I can't get away from them. So they're coming along. They're going to be with me in this. I'm taking them, if you like, on the journey of spiritual rebirth. Of course, you don't go home and tell mum and dad that. It might freak them out, but you know what I mean. Get the spirit of the thing. So this is another thing that we need to do, is value what we've been given, beginning with our parents and really reflecting, on all the people that have, given us so much. And of course, yes, you also have to turn to near and dear ones, husbands, wives, partners, and so on. It's very, very important, I think, to, when we talk about spiritual rebirth and when we talk about the bodhicitta, when we talk about universal loving kindness, we must begin with the people who are near and dear to us, who we're actually living with and we're in relationship to. I was talking to a young man in a study group, the last retreat, living with his wife and 2 sons. And he was saying that he was so grateful for the Dharma during lockdown. Both of them are Buddhists, him and his wife. And he said he's so grateful because he thought the Dharma probably saved their marriage. And I was hearing on the radio today, not their marriage was in peril, but because they both had the Dharma, there was more in the relationship than just each other. Of course, they had their children as well. But I was listening to the radio today and they were saying that divorce has really increased during this time, which is very, very sad and understandable. But this is where we really have to practice, with our near and dear ones. And one of the ways we do that is by reflecting on what they give us. So this is where gratitude comes in. This is a hugely important Buddhist practice. Gratitude. We don't dwell on it anywhere near enough. This is definitely a kind of spiritual rebirth practice, because gratitude is shifting the way you think about other people. What you're thinking about life, you're thinking much more in terms of the benefits that you've received rather than what's wrong with the world. The great Naropa sings, "Samsara is the tendency to find fault with others." That's what samsara is. That's what the non-spiritually reborn person does. They constantly find fault with the samsara, or they create samsara by finding fault with others. And don't we know it? We live in a world, a culture that encourages fault finding and which emphasizes not valuing what you've been given. Buddhist tradition turns it right round and says, no, if you want to make a new mind, if you want to be spiritually reborn, that new mind develops, first of all, gratitude. The word in Sanskrit for gratitude is kritagnyana, katanyata in Pali. Jnana is knowledge. Jnana is knowledge. Gratitude is a knowing, and krita means benefits received. So it's knowing the benefits that you've received, knowing directly what you've been given. Daily dwelling on that, daily dwelling on what you've received, what you're receiving, how you're enriched by so many things. And of course, that also includes the fact that a Buddha has arisen in the world, that the Dharma has come down to us, that it's been communicated to us in a form that we can actually use and practice. I'm particularly thinking of Bante's Sangharakshita's teaching because, well, there wasn't this system of meditation before he talked about it. You wouldn't have found that in the Buddhist books that were around in 1978. He comes with that vision and so many other things. So we actually have a coherent way of practicing now. We have spiritual friends. You have a wonderful Buddhist center. So we can dwell again and again on gratitude, reflecting on the benefits that we've received. And it's said that gratitude, reflecting on the benefits received, gives rise to love and compassion. This is what the tradition says. Some traditions say. We don't often talk like this, do we? But maybe if you're struggling with your metabhavna, maybe you need to look more at gratitude and the sense of joy that comes out of what you've been given. And then that will naturally turn into love, naturally turn into loving others. How are we doing for time? Oh, I better start moving forward and winding up. So what I'm talking about, if we're talking about spiritual rebirth, we have to start by really appreciating and valuing what we have already, what's already been given to us. Perhaps if we did that, we'd actually start to feel an immediate transformation. Certainly we'd be seeing the world in an entirely different way and from an entirely different point of view. And then going on, Shantideva says, today I am born into the Buddha family and I am now a child, a son, a daughter of the Buddha. So a son or daughter of the Buddha, being born of the Buddha family. What does this mean? Of course, he's got this experience of this great force of wisdom and compassion that has arisen in him and that he's committed himself to, that he's aligned himself to. But there's a bit more to it than that, perhaps. I am now born of the Buddha family. I am born into this family. How does this really come about? What more can we say? I've talked about gratitude. Of course, we could talk. I've also talked about really valuing your teaching and training and getting into that more deeply. But there's something I think missing. Something missing. I think what's missing is beauty. What's missing is beauty. I think real spiritual rebirth comes about when you realize that the Buddha is overwhelmingly beautiful, is the embodiment of ultimate beauty. If not the Buddha, then the different expressions of enlightenment, and we have the images of them here in this room to try and communicate that. Perhaps this isn't something that we often talk about, but I suppose this is something more experiential rather than anything sort of philosophical. But when I got involved in the Dharma, looking back, it wasn't because I was convinced by the teaching. I certainly was convinced by the teaching, but I think what really got me was complete, what's the word? Ensnarement by beauty. Yes, I'll use that language. I was completely fascinated by beauty. Spiritual beauty, I would say. That's what made me want to plunge in and never look back. And of course, beauty is inexplicable. Beauty is inexplicable. You can't sort of explain why. You can hint at it, but you can't really explain why. Beauty does something. When I mean spiritual beauty, actually any beauty, when it's something that's really beautiful for you, words fail. Words fail, ideas fail. You are enchanted. And you just want to wander into that realm. You're irresistibly attracted to it. And when it's spiritual beauty or transcendental beauty, you know that it's aligned with meaning. It's not just attractive, it's also profoundly meaningful. Yes, you can try and articulate what that meaning is. You can point to the wonderful Buddhist ideas and things like that, but in a way that doesn't quite do it. When I first came along to the Sangha, I read some books on Buddhism, thankfully Lama Govinda's books, which were hugely thrilling for me, especially The Way of the White Clouds, which is a very, very beautiful account of Lama Govinda's pilgrimages in Tibet. And it's full of beauty, not least his wife's beautiful black and white photographs of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They were a hugely important part of me discovering the Dharma. She was a wonderful photographer, an extraordinary woman. I had the good fortune of the honour of actually being involved in her funeral ceremony in Pune, but that's another story. But when I first stumbled across the FWBO, as it was, my first night was a full-length Metabhavna, followed by a sevenfold puja. By the end of the puja, I knew I would devote my life to Buddhism. I was 17 years old. I just knew. I can't tell you how I knew or why I knew. I even knew I was going to be an order member. I'd only just met one, about an hour before. I just knew. Why? Because it was the puja. This beautiful ritual, reciting these, and I wasn't just watching it, I was reciting these beautiful words, these mysterious words. I didn't know what with Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine meant. I didn't know what a Mandarava flower was, that it was a gigantic golden orange flower, like a kind of cosmic marigold, floating down from space. But I loved it. I was entranced. And, by the end of the puja, by the chanting of the mantras, I'd entered this world of enchantment and great meaning, deep meaning. And I was ensnared, irresistibly attracted. And, it's a recurring theme, that the recurring theme of beauty. What gets me out of bed in the morning to practice? It's to contemplate the beauty of particularly my personal meditation practice. But there's even more beauty, the beauty of my friends at Padmaloka, the beauty of joining you this evening. It's sort of everywhere as you get into the Dharma. It's interesting, the Buddha himself was often seen, I would say, and sometimes this is really brought out, as an incredibly beautiful man. Even when he was very old, people would look at him with great fascination. There was a sort of irresistible attraction to him. We don't really know what the Buddha looked like. He didn't have a bump on his head and golden skin or anything like that. I mean, he's probably quite dark-skinned, actually. But there was this quality, this kind of luminous quality to him, and his way of walking, his mindfulness, that elephant walk, as it's called, every step placed down, just so very attractive. Mindfulness, the elephant look, if he looked at you, he'd turn right round and face you and really look at you. And of course, this quality of metta emanating from him. There's even a wonderful story in the Pali text, and a not very well-known story actually, of Vakali. He's one of my favourite disciples of the Buddha. And he lived in Shravasti, and he saw the Buddha one day, and he fell in love with him. And he just thought, I've got to be with that man all the time. He's so beautiful. The only way he was going to do that was by becoming a monk. Didn't want to become a monk, but if he was going to be able to hang around the Buddha, he had to be ordained. So he was ordained, and in the rainy season retreat, he was just hanging around the Buddha all the time, just gazing at his beauty. And the end of the rainy season retreat, the Buddha said to Vakali, go into retreat. I want you to go into the forest, into the jungle and retreat. No discussion, no reporting in about it, no kind of facilitation, and he didn't want to go because he just loved being with the Buddha. Well, presumably the Buddha could see that, and he needed to go a bit deeper, into that. He was distracted perhaps too much by the beauty of the Buddha. But the thing was, he was attracted. And even in retreat, apparently he was having visions of the Buddha, beautiful visions of the Buddha. But even the visions would say, Bakali, stop looking at me and get on with your meditation, and things like that. And but it's a wonderful story. And in his verses, in the Theragatha, it has a sort of dialogue with the Buddha. Vakali was quite sickly. He wasn't a well chap. But he was tough, and he was in retreat. And the Buddha said to him, "What will you do, Vakali? What will you do, O monk, when you're in the forest, when you have stomach pains, and it's hard to get alms food, it's hard to get the food from begging? What will you do?" And he said, "Flooding my body with abundant happiness and joy, I will dwell in the forest. Recollecting all the spiritual faculties, I will dwell in the forest. Recollecting those, the Sangha, who are ardent and dwelling in harmony, I will dwell in the forest, in the jungle. Recollecting the perfect Buddha, the mindful one, the composed one, I will dwell in the forest." Very, very inspiring. So these verses seem to indicate that, yes, what kept in there was the bliss, the joy of constantly recollecting the Buddha, constantly recollecting the Dharma, constantly recollecting the Sangha. So if we're going to bring about a spiritual rebirth, yes, we need to recollect our precious human existence. We need to really meditate on this wonderful quality of consciousness we have. We need to reflect on our precious opportunity. We need to remember what we've been given by others, by all others, have a complete shift of consciousness where we're thinking more about what we've been given than what we are trying to get, so that, of course, we can give back to others with loving kindness and compassion. And yes, let's meditate regularly on the beauty, the transcendental beauty of the Buddha, of the Buddhas, of the Bodhisattvas. There we are. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Padmavajra. And I can't even begin to summarize that, even if to do so were appropriate. So I'm not going to try, but as with all great Dharma talks, I felt like it was addressed to me personally. And Padmavajra is saying, pull your socks up and remember what you've been given. Be grateful. Don't moan about lockdown or how boring things are, which I've been known to do. Remember beauty. Remember the Dharma. Remember the things that you've been given. There were so many questions that have arisen. So, are we prepared to die to be truly transformed? Yeah. Do we really reflect on how precious this opportunity is? Yeah. And then there are so many questions arising from that, which you can take into the breakout rooms with you. But one really good way of showing our appreciation and gratitude to Padmavajra and Padmaloka would be to make a donation. So as with all retreat centres, Padmaloka has of course been closed to flesh and blood retreatants to hold. It hasn't been able to hold real retreats for the best part of a year. And of course, that's had a major impact on its finances, as it has on all the finances of all retreat centres. And Padmaloka is such an important place. It has such an important place in our movement that it would be fantastic if you could make a little contribution to just keeping it going, keeping that flow of the Dharma going, supporting people like Padmavajra to do what he does so well and with such heart. So if he hasn't done so already, I'll ask Vajra. He has done it before he even said it. So there is a link to the donation page in the chat. So please click on that link and consider giving some money to Padmaloka by way of appreciation and gratitude for what we've been given this evening, these amazing riches. And I'm so appreciative, and I feel like I can walk out of this talk to in some small degree reborn. So thanks once again, Padmavajra.